in this inquiry question, we look at how science is reported, because that's a really important part of our modern world where we're surrounded by 24-hour news cycles. People can instantly connect across the planet, and how that influences our understanding. Now, there's a huge number of examples here. So, in this first example, we're going to look at a couple of scientific debates. The first one we're going to look at is climate change. Now, climate change is something that is still debated to this day, even though the vast majority of scientists, the vast majority of economists now agree that it's an issue. And so one of the things we need to look at is the accuracy of this information. And so if we look here, we have seen this graphic before, but as we said previously, going back to 1820, this idea of atmospheric pollution causing climate change has been with us. And so it is something that has been around for a very long time. It actually is occurring. And in this case here, we can say the information is accurate because it's been collated by well-known scientists, and not that being well-known is important, but scientists who've made discoveries in a whole range of fields, and their work has all corroborated each other. Nothing has really contradicted it. So in this case here, we can say that this information is pretty accurate. And of course, this little comparison here of firstly with the green line, which is our measurement of temperature, which going back to 1850, it was gone up, it's gone down. And that's one of the things that climate debate has got there, that things have gone up and gone down. And they have. But often there's reasons for that. And particularly, you look here in this part here, this went down because there was a massive worldwide conflict which influenced things there. You then go to the 1970s where there was fuel crises, and so things plateaued again. But since the 1980s, in late 70s, early 1980s, when we started collecting CO2 data, there is a correlation. And the majority of scientists, when they look at the data, suggest that there is a correlation between them. There's also a causative effect. Now, of course, the validity of the data, is the validity of the data, is it valid? And this is one of the things here that a lot of people sort of consider, that science is absolute. That when a scientific idea is produced, then that's true. Now, in the case of the climate is such a complex system that it's really hard to model effectively, because you are talking about a whole range of different cells or different ecosystems interacting with each other, and it is really hard to 100% accurately predict what's going on there. And so one of the things there that people will often talk about, a graphic like this one here, which is from some studies done a while ago, and they were talking about, well, okay, here's what our modelling has suggested so far, and here's what the modelling suggests is going to happen in the future. So if we don't reduce carbon emissions, then this is the amount in the air. If we do this, we do that. And if we have the lowest path and we start reducing emissions, it'll slowly go down. And this is a thing where scientists understand that there is subtlety in the data and there's different questions to ask, which often in the general public, they just want definitive answers. And so, as we said there, the complexity makes it really hard, because most people don't understand how scientific modelling works. And then you have people like Donald Trump, and this is a tweet from him well before he ran for president, where trying to suggest that global warming is a Chinese conspiracy. And then you also have over on the right hand side there a graphic from Fox News, and saying that global warming is just a thing from all the hippie left wing people trying to do whatever they do there. So in this case here, the reliability of these information sources, well, for most people, would be saying it's pretty low. It's not very reliable at all. And yet 75 million people, each election voted for Donald Trump. And so there's 75 million people in the US who think Trump is a better source than a Bureau of Meteorology. Another contemporary debate that has caused a lot of consternation over the years is the idea of genetic engineering. And it's this term that a lot of people, one, don't understand, and because they don't necessarily understand it, think that the idea of genetic engineering is a bad thing. And so a lot of people don't actually realize that human civilization has been genetically modifying our food and supply for over 10,000 years. When people first started settling down in communities, they started developing crops. And then they started changing that. So even a simple crop like wheat is essentially a grass seed. And they sort of did selective breeding on that to try and get plants that grew bigger grass seeds. Lemons, cherries, whatever that other fruit is there. They do not appear in nature. They've come from farmers doing crossbreeding. The apple seeds are well known for being poisonous, and the original apples essentially were the seeds with a little bit of fruit around it. But selective breeding over time allowed the fruit part to grow, and we have a non-toxic or mostly non-toxic food source. And so there is a big jump from 10,000 years ago to the 1700s, 1800s, and then we get to the mid-20th century. And once the discovery of DNA is made, and society gets a better understanding of the nature of genetics, this idea of deliberately changing genetic material for an outcome. And so we have things there where the 1970s started experiments on that, a whole range of things there. Then you get to the 1980s where plants are deliberately genetically changed. We also then get to the 90s where things like cheese is manufactured from genetically modified microbes. And then we then get into the 2000s where we now have things like CRISPR, which is a way of precisely and very, very quickly changing the genetics or the genetic makeup of organisms. And again, similar to climate change, when people aren't sure about an idea, they don't understand the idea, there's a bit of fear about that. And of course, one of the big fears is things like designer babies. People will argue that, we can't change genetics. Some people may say, that's a preordained characteristic. Being born is a bit of luck. But there are other people as well to say, well, why shouldn't we manipulate our genome? Many children are born with genetic conditions that may mean that they have a lifetime of suffering if they live past a certain age. So if you could change their genetics so that they no longer have a condition like haemophilia, cystic fibrosis, or anything like that, is that a good thing? The graphic below, funnily enough, from Fox News as well, who did some reporting on saying, COVID-19 was quite obviously made in a lab. And so they're saying there that, that they obviously genetically modified this as a weapon. There's no evidence for that. It was more hearsay, which unfortunately some news media outlets do that. And what you also have there is that people get angry about it because they think that genetically modified food is bad for them, without realizing that every bit of food you consume now in the modern world has been genetically modified from ancient things. So even when you go and pay a huge amount of money for ancient grains or anything like that, they're not the original grains. They're still genetically modified. They're just a slightly different grain. So every bit of food we eat has been genetically modified. It's just that it happened over a long period of time as opposed to a short period of time or instantly using CRISPR. And people do worry about that. They worry about, what it's going to do to their body. But, these are the same people that may have been following Trump's things for injecting bleach and things like that, which is instantly obviously going to kill you. And of course, as we said before, everything we eat today has come from somewhere else. And so if you look at it from a macroscopic point of view, 61% of our calories come from 12 crops. Every single one of those crops has been modified over thousands and thousands of years. The majority of the world eats from meat. The majority of the world that eats meat eats 5 animals. And of course, add that up there, that there is still other food there, but it's a very low percentage. And so there are still some societies and places that will eat things like insects and that. But again, in the Western world, there's a bit of a fear, a bit of ick factor about doing that. And in the end, the debate about genetically modifying things is this idea of humans playing God. And this idea that should we as humans be able to deliberately modify life? And it's like a lot of ethical issues, there's no right or wrong answer. It often comes down to your personal beliefs. But in the end, can this technology improve our lives?